I have, Jim. Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thanks for the invitation to present and to talk on our submission. Just a little bit about Black and White Cabs. We're a service provider to the taxi industry in 4 locations in Australia: Brisbane, Perth, Toowoomba, and Redcliffe. Under our affiliation, there's 1,400 taxis in total. We have some 4,000 taxi drivers affiliated with our company. We've got over 200 staff. And our business is a formation of a company that goes back to 1918 in Ascot Cabs and Blue and White taxis. We're very happy to support the bill, and we certainly do in its amended form as put forward by Taxi Council. The taxi industry is regulated in Queensland, and the government has issued a cease and desist notice to Uber particularly. There are other illegal taxi operators as we've identified, but there has been a cease and desist notice issued to Uber. There's been fines issued to Uber to Uber drivers and other drivers. There's been fines that have been paid, which is an admission of guilt, and I think that's an important element to be dealing with. These drivers are operating without a taxi licence. They're operating without the correct compulsory third-party insurance, and they're also, in most cases, operating without the correct driver's authorisation. Despite Uber's spin on things, there is a downturn in work for the taxi industry. It's quite evident and biting quite hard as we speak today. The amount of work that Uber publicise that they're enjoying is somewhat comparable to the downturn in the taxi industry and the work that we're seeing in decline, and we think that's an important element, that the work they say is growing the market. We don't see it as growing the market. We see it as just stealing from our industry, which is regulated and legal. We also see that there's perhaps a class emerging from the Uber operations and other rideshare type operations of a poor working class. We see that in various literature around the world, and we're mindful that might be happening in Australia. What we see that these rideshare people do is they work in the area of the taxi industry. They are taking away the low-hanging fruit. They're certainly cherry-picking the business that is the easy business, the inner-city business, the nightclub business. They're not expanding themselves out to areas of the outer areas. They don't have to work 24/7. There's certainly no assistance to the disabled community of any notice. Elderly, the frail, and as I said, the outer areas of the taxi industry. And the industry has been quite disaffected. Just looking a little bit further forward, we are currently in a review process, and I commend Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Minister and Transport Minister Jackie Trad on the commissioning of the review. It's underway. Personalised transport services is going to be a very detailed review. I've already met with Jim Bargheese, the chair of the review. We've opened our books, we've opened our business to his review process. We've already provided him with some data and financial information, and we see this review as very important to the taxi industry and in fact to all Queenslanders, provided it's done in a very collaborative way. We're seeing that Jim's, in the outset, that's his approach to that. As far as the immediate position, we see that these rideshare operators are operating illegally. We need to stem the damage that they are doing to our industry while the collaborative review goes underway. We need to do something now, and this bill is very much supported by us. What's happening is that the drivers of these illegal taxis are operating with the mindset that there's no inhibitor to them to stop their illegal practice, because Uber are paying the fines or passing the money over to them to pay the fines. So there's no detriment to them to keep going with their illegal activities. In addition to that, new drivers are joining this group because they see there's nothing going on. When they see the inaction, they then say, well, we can do this as well, and they're joining in, and that's why it's growing. And if you look at pricing, you look at the differentiation in pricing between a regulated industry and the cost of regulation and the safety features and the service features that fit around that regulation, and you look at a unregulated business, the costs are much lower. And we've spoken about those before as an industry, but right now the public are leaning towards a low-cost solution to personalised public transport, but it's unregulated and it doesn't have the shackles of cost regulations that we have through licensing and through regulation. So the immediate measures that I see are required are to continue on with the review, but in the short term we need to make sure that the compliance activity by our officers gives us this transitional period to design the new personalised public transport system for the future. But in the meantime, all the mums and dads and families associated with the taxi industry are protected to some degree, or certainly the law is enforced to make sure that the taxi industry and others comply by the law. I note that the addition to the legislation that will involve the police, I think that's paramount. The Police Assistant Commissioner Mike Keating in a meeting with us said we've got no appetite for this, and he was referring to the compliance measures against the illegal taxis. It seems the police themselves are looking for more empowerment, and this bill will deliver that, and we want that to occur. So in summary, in my opening remarks, rideshare services are illegal, and I think that's proven. The taxi industry is being disaffected. There is a welcome review underway with personalised public transport. But this bill needs to be implemented and enforced so the relevant laws and that currently stand are upheld.
Thanks, Greg. Did you have anything to
No, nothing.
You talked about the review again. So the review is about the taxi industry.
No, the review is covering the personalised public transport. So in a nutshell, there's three elements to that. There's taxi industry, limousine industry and rideshare.
So rideshare becomes part of that review?
Correct.
Okay. In your submission, you made a statement, and I'll have to read it, I'm sorry. ADO has decided Uber drivers are providing taxi service and must charge GST no matter the turnover. Prior to this, lost revenue for government appears that Uber has adopted taxation minimisation strategy. What do you mean by that? Okay,
so there is a threshold for GST payments in Australia of $75,000. The taxi industry does not have that threshold, and it has to pay GST from a zero income base or $1 income base. What we're seeing with Uber is, once again, they have got a price advantage where they're not charging the public GST, so they're not adding that onto their fare. The Government of Australia is not collecting that tax revenue. State of Queensland benefits from that tax revenue. So we're seeing a complete avoidance of the tax laws because they're saying they're not a taxi service when they're in fact providing a taxi service.
Okay. Would you be able to give us a summary on what you see has happened to the industry since we've had Uber take a stronghold here in Brisbane?
Sure. Well, we operate, I think I said to you, we operate 200 taxis ourselves, so I day-to-day see taxi takings. I'm talking to drivers all the time. I'm very close to the industry. So in a sense, we're seeing it being hit in three different ways. Firstly, taxi drivers are being disaffected by the fact that their income levels are dropping, and that's borne out by dispatch system data. We're seeing our number of bookings decline. We're seeing our dispatch systems are quite unique in that they can also measure the number of hails that happen on the street. So hail and rank information we can see as well, and we're seeing that decline as well. So taxi drivers are seeing a loss of income. Secondly, a taxi operator. Normally there's about a 50-50 split between revenues between a taxi driver and a taxi operator. There's certain deals that are done between taxi operators and taxi drivers. They're all commercial arrangements, but in principle it's about a 50-50 relationship. So rolling on from that is there's a decline to the taxi operator as well. So the taxi operator is responsible for all the costs of running the taxi. He's responsible for the car. He's responsible for all the compliance costs of government, licence fees, operator accreditation, cameras, rah rah rah. So he's seeing a decline in income as well. So then the knock-on effect to that is now to taxi licence owners. So some of those licence owners are landlord-type investors. Some are very much hands-on in the industry. So you're seeing now a decline in income to the taxi licence owner by the taxi operator having to drop the price of the licence lease to be able to remain viable. So right through, the knock-on is going right through our industry.
And that's fair comment. How do you factor in the economic conditions as they are at the moment? Because it's very obvious that the state is struggling.
Okay.
So you must be able to be fair to income.
Yes.
You have to be able to factor that in.
Sure. Look, we are certainly taking into account that there is an economic downturn in our industry, and that there's certain areas of the industry, less so in tourism now, but more so in particularly the city areas and some of the regional areas through mining and that. So I use the example of the Sunshine Coast. I'm privileged as a board member. I was privileged to data for the Sunshine Coast. Up until recently, there was no Uber involvement on the Sunshine Coast. And I can look at their data and say, okay, how is the Sunshine Coast going compared to Brisbane? So what is the change here? So I look at the Sunshine Coast and I see, and I won't quote numbers because it would be inappropriate, but I see either a flatness of revenue compared to last year, or a small decline. I go to Brisbane, I see no flatness, I see a decline or a large decline. So when I take into account, one is Brisbane, so the economy is causing the Sunshine Coast to be sort of flat line, and Brisbane we're seeing a large decline. So when I measure that way, also we can look at the data throughout the state from our all taxi companies, has been previously told to you, reports on a quarterly basis, and you can see the trending going on there with taxi bookings quite readily.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just want to go back to the Chair's question about GST, and I see on page 12 of your submission that you've said from August 1, all Uber drivers are now required to obtain ABNs and register for GST, and that the ATO has decided Uber drivers are providing a taxi service. Has the ATO made are you aware, has the ATO made a tax ruling on this that applies specifically to Uber?
If the Uber driver didn't have the capacity to pay, then that would be left with the Commonwealth under the nominal defendant scheme. So we're saying that's a cost to community if CTP is not of the same standard 3 that we have as a taxi industry.
I'll just take one more question, Brittany.
Yeah, sure. This might be. One of the things I'm really interested in is the app being, it seems, the lifeblood of the whole Uber service. Mm-hmm. And the Apple Store guidelines, the App Store guidelines, the legal requirements, item 22.1 in the legal requirements specifies that apps must comply with all legal requirements in any location where they are made available to users. And I just wondered if the taxi industry, and maybe there's a role for government to play here, had made any complaint or reported the non-compliance with the legal requirements in the App Store.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether complaints have been made. I know the industry has investigated Uber's ability to access the net, number one, to advertise its illegal services, number two, with Apple and with Google, Android-type products. All those have been investigated, but there's been a pushback by the suppliers, the Apple and others, to say, we need to provide legal evidence. There's a lot of work for us to do in a federal sphere as well, not just in a state sphere.
Maybe perhaps government and maybe we could help with that too.
Yep. But we would welcome that if that could be done. Yes.
Well, thanks very much. Time has expired, unfortunately.
Yeah. Just to close it, I'd be welcome to, I'd welcome the committee or Jim, you the chair of the committee, come to Black and White Cabs and look over our operation at any time. So open our doors to you and see what happens in that.
We've discussed that point as a committee, and we have to make a decision, because if we go to one, we're going to have to go to the lot.
Yeah, I got you.
And to be fair, so but we want to talk to people. May want to have to talk to people in other communities as well.
Blue and white.
Blue and white.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.